Let me begin by asking you, Kaushik, about the key priorities that you see in the emerging situation as far as Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharamana is concerned. She's already had several rounds of meeting, and the key budget numbers are being shaped up even as we are speaking. What are your key expectations from the forthcoming budget?
Hi, Siddharth. Thanks for inviting me to your show. This third wave that we are talking about, it doesn't come as a complete surprise. In fact, for the last few months, we've been always kind of fearing that there will be a third wave at some point of time. We just didn't know that it will come through the form of an Omicron related variant. But, the cases have started increasing, and I think, these cases will keep on increasing and probably will peak at some time during February. So this particular third wave obviously will have some effect on the budget formulation. And as far as expectations are concerned, this fiscal year, we have set a fiscal deficit target of 6.8% of GDP, which could go up to 7% because the government has announced more spending in the last month. From there, we would expect that next year they would set a fiscal deficit target of something around 6.5%. Because you would need to support the economy for a little bit longer period of time. We have had a lot of fiscal support in the last 2 years, but given the third wave, we would still need more support. There are two other aspects related to the budget formulation, the challenge, the delicate balance that the finance ministry will face. One is supporting different stakeholders of the economy to ensure that demand is supported. But in a way that it doesn't stoke inflation. Inflation is also becoming a big concern worldwide, and India also, we've seen inflation remaining above 5%, on an average for the last, several months. So how do you form a budget which supports the economy but doesn't cause inflation? And in that way, the government has been supporting capital expenditure. So I would expect capital expenditure to remain strong, and that should create a multiplier impact. And the third aspect is, how do you finance that fiscal deficit? How much do you borrow from the market? Does it cause interest rates to increase? Then whether RBI can, have to come and buy again bonds. So those issues will come up. So it's a very delicate balance. So I would say we are going with 6.5% of GDP, worth fiscal deficit with some bit of support, targeted support for different stakeholders who need the, support at this point of time.
Kaushik, what you're saying is continued targeted support and a reduction, even if by 30 basis points, on the fiscal deficit. Madan, let me come to you on that before I go to the former policy maker on the panel. Madan, you heard Kaushik, and I would want to begin my question by asking you, given what has happened to the recovery and given what now seems to be happening with the third wave, and we'll all pray and hope that it passes by very, very quickly without causing any major damage, do you think it's time for the government of India to target a reduction in the fiscal deficit, or should it continue at least from the current year's point of view?
No, I think, Siddharth, as far as the government ideologically is concerned, I would tend to believe that they would be looking at lowering the fiscal deficit ratio, something in the region of 5.5% to 6%. Now, I think the critical factor will really mean that will depend upon what happens in the next 15 days, whether there are lockdowns and curfews which are imposed for a longer period of time. Because we should remember that a critical part of our economy, the services sector, was something which was getting back on its feet. And I remember during October, November, we were quite euphoric, thinking that the pent-up demand has come into services and it's only looking upwards from now onwards. So it all depends upon what the center, the states, the municipals, the panchayats do in terms of lockdowns, because that could actually push back growth. And if that happens, the entire concept of the budget is going to change, because you will need to continue to spend money on relief, because I don't think the states have the wherewithal to spend on relief. So that particular component will have to continue. But knowing the government, the way in which it has behaved in the past, I think moving along the fiscal path will be a priority. And I think side by side, there will of course be this entire saga of disinvestment, because I think that's something which has not yet played out. We're not quite sure if it's going to happen by March. So I think fiscal deficit, capital expenditure, disinvestment, these are the three main things which would be on the agenda of the FM under normal circumstances, which will continue to be even this year. And in case of lockdowns being imposed beyond, say, January 7th, which I think looks very much likely to different measures, then I think the government will have to peg away at certain relief expenditure. Of course, there will be this conundrum about how revenue is going to increase, because we know if there's a lockdown, automatically there will be a hit which is taken by both the center and the states, and there's GST compensation, so on and so forth. But that is something which they will definitely keep up. So I think the compromise will probably be on the fiscal deficit ratio, but definitely I think 5.5 to 6% is what we will be looking at. Maybe 0.25 more, maybe a compromise in case there are further lockdowns in various parts of the country.
Madan, one very quick point before I go to Mr. Gopalan. Do you think it's time to be ideological? Ideological in the sense that India was perhaps the only major economy where the central government, the government was conservative during the pandemic last year, and the Reserve Bank let loose the monetary tap. Do you think it is time to be ideological or be more pragmatic?
No, but I would say, practically speaking, I look at the government as being ideological. So therefore, I think they're going to move on this path. Because when conditions were tough, they chose to follow a kind of a fiscal path which wasn't giving too much of freebies, help the poor, let the rich, enable the rich to get back on their feet. And I think that's the policy which they will pursue. There's no reason for them to change things now. I don't think they will do it, even though we can say that it should ideally do it. But I think practically speaking, I don't think the government is going to say, look, let me stick to 6.8 or let me go to 7.5% fiscal deficit and get us out of the rut. I don't think that is the path which the government will choose.